You're listening to the Fit in Real Life podcast, episode 422. This is Tanya Shaw, your host, and today we're going to do a deep dive on protein. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you probably have heard that protein is really important. It's good for us, and we should have more protein. And if you have been living under a rock, well, maybe that's a great place to be as well. But once you get out to the world, you're going to realize that protein is everywhere. And actually, recently on social media, I have been seeing some reels that are making fun of this push about protein, where it's like, oh, you must have your protein. And, protein's everywhere. People are having nightmares about how much protein you should be having. And right now on social media too, cottage cheese is a new thing. It's not new, it's been out there for a long time. At first it was cauliflower. We make cauliflower rice and pizza, and cauliflower could be anything. And now we're using cottage cheese to make, flatbread and cheesecake and all these things. And because protein is in the limelight. Now, every macronutrients are fat, carbs, and protein have had their time in the limelight. Back in the day, fats were demonized, and then it was all about carbs. We weren't really focusing on carbs, but because you take fat to the diet, your calories have to come from somewhere. So it was all about carbs, and fats were bad, and fats were causing heart disease, and fats were making us fat. So we were afraid of fat, and we're taking it out. And now we realize that, well, maybe adding so much refined carbohydrates to our diet wasn't such a good thing. It didn't really help with the obesity epidemic. It didn't make us healthier. So maybe fats really are not the cause of everything bad in the world. And so then carbs were demonized, and we're now going low carb and adding fats back, and the pendulum's swinging wildly the other way. And there's things like the keto diet and the paleo diets, which are, very high or higher in fats, lower in carbs. The paleo isn't specifically a low carb diet, but it tends to be just because there are no, rice and pasta and beans, and you're allowed potatoes now on the paleo diet. And I think you were always allowed sweet potatoes because apparently our Paleolithic, lithic ancestors ate sweet potatoes, but not white potatoes. But now you can eat white potatoes. Anyhow, we go back and forth and we swing wildly from one camp to the other. And now we are really focusing on protein. So protein has always been a part of our diets. It's not like we ever tried to take out protein, back in the day, or when we were going low fat, we still had some protein, probably lower protein, higher carbs still. But now we are realizing how wonderful and how important protein is for us. And just like we like to do, when we realize something is good, then maybe having a lot is even better. And now there are protein powders everywhere, and protein bars and protein shakes, and there's protein oatmeal, and there's protein cereal, and there's the peanut butter that says, oh, we have like 3 grams of protein per serving. Or if you have enough Reese's Pieces peanut butter cups, you're like, well, I have like 30 grams of protein if I eat 400 Reese's Pieces peanut butter cups, so maybe that's a good choice. So today I want to break down protein. I want to talk about why it's important, why you should care, how much do you really need? Are we getting it from the right sources? And also some myths and misconceptions. Things like, does eating more protein mean that you're going to gain more muscle mass? Is too much protein dangerous? What about plant-based proteins? What if I don't hit my protein goals in a day? Should I just eat some cottage cheese or some Greek yogurt and down it down to get my protein goals? And I also want to go over things like, well, what is a macronutrient and what does that look like? How do you track macronutrients compared to how do you track calories? So go over some of the basics of all of this as well. So I'm glad that you're here because I know that when we have these things on social media, when we have these things that are circling around, there is a lot of good information, but there's also lots of misinformation. And here I want to just use a common sense approach to how we can interpret this and how you can kind of make it work for your lifestyle. So first of all, what is protein and why do we need it? Protein is a chain of amino acids. Amino acids are essentially the building blocks, the little parts, the building blocks of protein. When protein is digested in the body, it breaks down to amino acids. Now, amino acids are either essential or non essential. Essential means that we just need to get them from our diet. We cannot make them ourselves. We cannot take the building blocks of amino acids, the actual carbons and the nitrogens and make those amino acids, we must actually eat them. We must get them from our diet. Non-essential amino acids are amino acids that we can actually produce. So given the right building blocks, given the right like the nitrogen, the carbons, we can actually make them in our body. Now, animal sources are complete proteins, which means that they have all of the essential amino acids. Most plant sources are incomplete proteins, meaning that they don't have all of the essential amino acids. It doesn't mean you can't get all of your essential amino acids from a plant-based diet. It just means that you need to eat a variety of different proteins, which I would recommend doing anyway, to get all of the amino acids that are required for your life. So why do we need protein? So protein isn't just about building muscles, although that's a big part of it. Protein is important for repairing tissues after injuries, for producing enzymes and hormones. Enzymes are made out of proteins. Hormones like insulin, which is a very important hormone, requires protein. It's also important for your immune function. Your antibodies are proteins. It's important for satiety. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but you feel full a lot longer when you have protein. You have less cravings when you have protein. So when you think about recovering from your strength training workout, healing from a wound, maybe you were sick, protein is going to play a role. Protein is so important. So how much protein do we need? Now, there is a wide range of advice out there. The recommended daily allowance for protein from our governing bodies say that we need 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight for sedentary adults. It goes up to 1 to 1.2 grams after the age of 40 because protein is very helpful to prevent muscle loss. And for all of us after the age of 40, we lose about 10% of our muscle mass per decade if we don't do anything about it. Now, the good news is you can do lots of things about it. You can build muscle into your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond by strength training, by getting adequate protein. But protein is helpful for sparing muscle. Now, the guideline of 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, in my opinion, and the opinion of really most people out there right now, is too low. Unless you're told for a very good reason, like you have kidney issues, that you have to keep your protein intake lower. You can play around for yourself. How do you feel when you up your protein intake? For the vast majority, 100%, the majority, all of the clients I work with who up their protein intake, they have more energy, they have less cravings, weight loss is easier, they're more satiated because they have enough protein. And also, if they are wanting to build muscle and working on building muscle, they need the protein to build that muscle. Protein just doesn't, or muscle doesn't just grow out of thin air. You need the protein to build the muscle. So, a better guideline, if you are, well, not just active, if you are a living person, is somewhere between 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. So again, 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. Now, I say ideal body weight because let's say you are 250 pounds and your ideal body weight is 150 pounds. It will be very hard to get 250 grams of protein in a day, and it's also unnecessary to have that much, and to also be in a caloric deficit. So aim for your ideal body weight. For myself, for example, I'm about 145 to 150 pounds. So let's say I'm 150 pounds and I am at my ideal body weight. If I times that by, divide it by 2.2 to get kilograms, because here in Canada, we talk about kilograms, but we actually weigh ourselves in pounds. And we use cups and we use centigrades, not Fahrenheits. And if we're going to go for a run, I'll tell you how far I ran in kilometers. But if I'm going to measure my height, I measure myself in feet and inches. So we're kind of all over the place. So most Canadians, we know pounds in terms of our weight, and we have to convert by dividing our weight in pounds to divide by 2.2 to get kilograms. So my weight in kilograms, let's say 150 pounds, is 68 kilograms. If I was to times that by 1.6, that's 109 grams per a day of protein. So that is my lower end of my protein goal. 100, 109, same sort of difference. So for myself, I personally aim for about 110 to 130 grams of protein per day. Do I hit it every day? No. In fact, I think it was Sunday. I had 2 pieces of toast for breakfast, not little toast, it was like big toast from Cobb's. I got the sourdough bread with 2 eggs and a little bit of avocado. Is so good. It was so satisfying. I had that for breakfast, and then for lunch, I had 2 pieces of sourdough bread again because we had sourdough bread, which we don't have it very often in our house like that, with a little bit of avocado and a bowl of soup, and then I had a little bit of meat for dinner. So my protein intake was like 60 grams that day. I didn't fret about it. I just went back to my normal eating the next day. I didn't lose muscle mass. I didn't gain a ton of weight. Nothing bad happened. I was actually very satiated. But just because you don't hit your protein goal in one day, you're going to be fine. Just look for trends. But that is my protein goal. 109 or 110 to about 130 grams of protein per day is what I aim for. So if you take the 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, that is a good place to aim. If you are currently way under that, do what's an improvement for you. Aim for just a little bit more. And definitely, if you are older, like over the age of 40, 50, 60, 70, 80s, around there, make sure you prioritize protein because we do lose muscle mass with age if we don't have adequate protein and if we don't strength train. And even if you are not strength training, having adequate protein can help to slow down the loss of muscle mass. Or if there's a time in your life where you're not able to strength train, for example, I have surgery coming up hopefully early next year. I don't have a date yet, where I'm going to be having to take a break from my workouts for at least a couple weeks because I'm not being able to walk. As soon as I can get to the gym, though, I will be doing some upper body and some seated stuff. I know I will. But in that time, I will prioritize protein because protein is going to help me maintain the muscle mass that I have, even though I cannot strength train. So, a couple of myths and misconceptions about protein. Number one is that more protein means that you're going to have more muscle mass. Now, there is a limit to how much protein we can have to build our muscle mass, and protein is not what builds muscle mass. An extra amount, if you've reached your capacity, if you have enough, is not going to increase the rate that you build muscle mass. Protein is important to repair the muscle when you work out. It is the strength training that's going to build muscle mass. And if you don't have quite enough protein and you strength train, you're still going to build muscle mass. You'll just probably recover better and build more if you have adequate protein. Myth number two is that high protein diets damage your kidneys. Now, I was thinking this for quite a while too, because I'm like, do we even know what's going to happen for the long term if we are eating 2.2, 2.5, some people do even more than that grams of protein per kilogram of body weight? Do we know the long-term effects of that? Because it seems like just now we're starting to really emphasize protein, and I'm not sure if we even have the data for the long term. However, research has shown that there is no harm to kidney function in healthy individuals on high protein diets. And so for myself, I personally don't feel the need to go above 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Some people do. Some people are having 170, 180, 200 grams of protein per day. Women who are not super huge. I don't see the need for that. For me personally, I still aim for 110, 130 grams of protein a day. And myth number three is that you can't absorb more than 30 grams of protein per meal. I listened to a podcast as to where this myth came from, but I don't remember where it came from. But the long story made short is that your body can absorb more than 30 grams of protein per meal. And it's also best that you still spread your protein intake over the day. So don't have 100 grams of protein in one sitting. Have 30 to 40 grams at each meal and some in your snacks. So that's going to be a better way to have more protein and to absorb it better, but you can still absorb more than 30 grams per meal. So sources of protein, you probably already know this. when I do talks about nutrition and I ask people, what are sources of protein? Most people get this. Animal sources are chicken, turkey, fish, eggs, milk, yogurt, lean beef. Plant sources are things like lentils, chickpeas, black beans, tofu, tempeh, quinoa. If you are on a plant-based protein, it is harder to get enough protein because there are very few protein sources. In fact, I say tofu is pretty high in protein, but there's lots of fat usually with tofu. Things like chickpeas, black beans, quinoa are actually relatively low in protein and still quite high in carbs and fiber. Things like hummus, which is chickpeas, is actually quite low in protein. It has some, but not a lot. Quinoa is not a huge source of protein. Peanut butter doesn't have a ton of protein, but they're all paired with other fat or carbs. So it makes it hard to get enough protein without really overdoing on your calories. So, with that being said, you can do things like adding a plant-based protein powder. That can be helpful. Your overall intake of protein might just be a little bit lower, which is fine. You're also having lots of wonderful things in a plant-based diet, like fiber is amazing. And then look for a variety of different protein sources. For snacks, you can have things like Greek yogurt, protein bars from time to time. Yesterday, I was grocery shopping and I just hit this wall where I'm like, I know I feel so hungry right now, and I still needed to check out and drive home and unload the groceries. And I could just feel myself getting like kind of hangry a little bit, just a little bit. And so I bought a little protein bar at the grocery store. And I had that, and that just made me feel so much better. And when I got home, I felt more level headed and I was able to unload the groceries without snapping at Keith and making him the problem when I just needed to eat some food. So, protein bars from time to time, cottage cheese, hard boiled eggs, nuts and seeds. Those are things for myself. I don't typically have a planned snack. I do snack, but usually it's honestly not that planned. But my meals are definitely focused on protein. And things like scrambled eggs, great for breakfast with spinach and whole grain toast. I've done podcasts before on how I build my high protein bowls. I simply just focus on protein in each meal. For lunch yesterday, I had black bean pasta with some cabbage and some squash and some Parmesan cheese. And some mayonnaise mixed in, of course, because that makes it nice and creamy. That was my lunch. Last night, I was going to have mini pizzas for dinner, but I wasn't super hungry. And by the time I went to go eat food, it was like 8:30 and I was going to go to bed soon. So I had some yogurt and 2 pieces of toast because we have cinnamon toast right now from Cobb's Bread. And it was really good. So I had some Greek yogurt, I had some toast, and that was my dinner because I prioritize protein. I kind of probably just had the toast, but I know that protein is important for me. And so I had that too. A couple tips here. If you're busy, just try to meal plan as best you can. I think that really helps. Boil eggs ahead of time. You can bake your chicken ahead of time, bake your tofu ahead of time. If you are a vegetarian or a vegan, combine your foods. So different types of beans, different types of whole grains can be helpful. You can also use plant-based protein powders. That can help as well. And then if you're on a budget, there are things like canned tuna, legumes, frozen meat, eggs, which are a little bit more affordable. Groceries have gone up a lot, and look for sale items, of course, too. And then timing. So ideally, we want to have the protein throughout the day versus just having it like in 2 meals or one meal. So maybe 3 to 4 times a day. In the past, in the bodybuilding kind of era, I mean, I think this is still going on in the bodybuilding phase, but we were told that we had to eat every 3 hours and we had to have protein at every meal. You don't. You can go longer than 3 hours in between meals. It's fine. But I would spread your protein throughout the day. You'll just feel better as well. If you have a very high carb meal, you might just feel kind of sluggish afterwards. Whereas you have protein, you're going to have more energy. And then in terms of after your workout, it is good to consume some protein 1 to 2 hours after exercise. It's not magical, and if you're not hungry and it's not mealtime, you can probably just wait till your next meal. I generally just eat breakfast after my workout in the morning anyway. But if I didn't and I wasn't hungry, or if I worked out right after my breakfast, I wouldn't run home and have a protein shake right away because I know that my body will utilize the stores I already have, and I have enough to to build muscle mass. So don't go crazy about this one, but if you can have some protein at your next meal, your first meal after your workout, that's a good thing. And then lots of questions that get asked. For example, is protein powder as good as whole foods? Now, protein powder it's a protein. And I think that if you have whole foods more often, you're going to get lots of other things as well. But there's nothing wrong. There's nothing like cheating about having a protein shake, especially when you have a protein shake, you can add other things to it as well. So whey protein happens to be actually a very high, good quality source of protein. It's very high in leucine, and leucine is one of the essential amino acids that is very, very important for building and maintaining muscle mass. And whey protein happens to be very high in that. So for breakfast this morning, I had a protein shake. I had 1.5 scoops of protein, had some almond milk, I had some spinach, half a banana in there, and that was my breakfast, and it was good. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having a protein powder. If you had it every single day for multiple meals, maybe if that was your only source of protein, that might be an issue. But if you have a protein shake every day, it is convenient and it is wonderful. Then there's the environment. There is a lot of people out there who share what they have in a day for protein, and it is very, very high in animal proteins. And the question that I would ask is, what's the impact of that on our environment? As humans, we tend to be very short sighted. Keith and I have been around to different parks in different parts of mostly North America, and there's different historical sites, and they'll talk about how, in this one site, this one place, fishing was very abundant back in the 1930s. And then, we came and we started fishing and having canneries, and then we overfished, and now there's like no fish left. And we tend to be really good at just consuming everything for our needs without really thinking about the longevity of the planet and the generations to come. The argument to that is that we could just eat higher quality, sustainably raised, humanely raised animals, which I think if we can, that is amazing, and I would go for it. The two issues there is, one, it is extremely expensive to eat organic, free range, humanely raised animals, to buy the eggs, etc. It is a lot more expensive. The other issue is that we just don't have the capacity to raise animals in that way to feed our population if we are meant to be eating animal products and chicken and fish and beef at every single meal 3 times a day or 4 times a day. And so, with that being said, I personally believe that having a mix of animal and plant-based proteins can be helpful for your health and also the planet. Plant-based proteins are also going to be really awesome in other nutrients and other nutritions. Sound like my dad. Other nutrients, and also very high in fiber. There's wonderful things about plant-based proteins. So you could have a combination of all of it. And perhaps you have one meal, maybe you're making a curry out of tofu or a curry out of chickpeas and lentils, and maybe it's not quite as high in protein. Maybe you got 20 grams or 18 grams of protein instead of the 30 grams that you're aiming for. You know what? You're going to be fine. You're not going to waste away. You're not going to have tons of cravings. You're not going to like lose muscle mass or ruin your workouts. You're going to be absolutely fine. The next question is, what if I'm at my caloric goal, but under my protein goal? So what if I've already eaten my 17, 2,000, 2,200 calories a day, and I just ate way too much bread and ice cream today? Do I stuff down some Greek yogurt or some eggs, or do I just go to bed because I had enough? And you might hear different advice on this one. My advice is, for the most part, just go to bed. If you don't hit your protein goal one day, again, nothing bad's going to happen. You could have no protein one day and nothing's bad's going to happen. Look for trends over time. And so if every single day you're way under your protein intake, you might want to look at your habits. You might want to look at seeing what you can do to increase your protein intake, but don't just shove down some plain Greek yogurt, standing at the kitchen counter because you need to get your protein goals. Just go to bed and do work on it tomorrow. And then same thing, what if one meal has no protein? Again, it doesn't matter. What matters is your total daily intake. If your breakfast was super low in protein, maybe aim for some at lunchtime. One of the reasons why I love having more protein at breakfast, I start my day usually with cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, some all brown, and some fruit. It's very high in protein. And I know by having that, by starting my day with protein, it just makes getting my protein goals easier. And there's less emphasis on lunch and dinner because I've already had some. And then should I eat protein with every meal? Ideally, yes, some protein at each meal. But again, if you have a meal from time to time that doesn't have protein, it's totally fine. You might have a big bowl of soup and a piece of toast and feel like that's so satisfying. Or maybe have some avocado and some hummus. And hummus, yes, has a little bit of protein, and your toast has a little bit of protein, but maybe you're like 8 grams or 10 grams. Again, nothing bad's going to happen. You're not going to lose your muscle mass. You're not going to lose your progress. You're still going to be able to go to the gym the next day, or you're still going to be able to recover. So look at the big picture, zoom out, and stop getting so obsessed about the nitty gritties. So a couple things that I do to help myself and help others to increase your protein intake. Number one is just being aware of it. I think once you have the goal of upping your protein intake, whether you track or not, you're just going to start to increase your protein intake because you're more aware of it. If you do track, if you are measuring, I do recommend the app called Chronometer, Cronemeter, I think how that's spelled, because it also breaks down the specific amino acids, which I really like. I like knowing how much leucine I get in a day and aiming for adequate amounts of leucine. I usually get around 6 to 8 grams of leucine a day. So being aware, tracking can really help. And whether you actually weigh and measure your food or you just make sure that you're having some protein at each meal, that could be helpful. If you don't track regularly, you can still get an idea of how much protein you're having in a day just by tracking a few days at a time. Or perhaps you have the same breakfast over and over again and just knowing that, well, yeah, you typically have this for breakfast. And I know that this breakfast, if I have a half a cup of cottage cheese and a cup of yogurt and some berries and some granola, I know that it has 37 grams of protein. And then if you have that, on a couple of occasions, or you have that every single day, then you know how much protein you're having. And then swap out lower protein for higher protein options. So, for example, Greek yogurt instead of regular yogurt, you can just add protein. So, making sure you're focusing on beans, legumes. For myself, I simply just prioritize protein at each meal. I use that PFFF guidelines where it's protein, fiber, fat, and flavor. If you go to tanyashaw.com/, I don't remember what it is. Actually, let me just pause for a second and look this up for you. All right, it is www.tanyashaw.com/macros. I will share with you how to build a better meal and how to hit your macro goals using the PFFF guidelines. And for me, also, I have a protein shake most days, at least in the summertime, wintertime, not so much, but I do emphasize protein at each meal. All right, takeaways. Protein is important for everyone, not just for gym goers. Although I do recommend that you go to the gym or you stay home and you lift some weights. As you get older, our protein requirements actually goes up. Focus on consistency versus obsessing over the exact grams. And I encourage you to reflect on yourself. How much protein am I getting? Maybe you want to track for a little while. Maybe you want to simply just focus on having some protein at each meal. Small changes matter. You can start with breakfast. You can start with having maybe you have right now toast and one egg. An egg has about 6 grams of protein. A piece of toast has maybe like 3. So let's say you're now at 9 grams of protein. Maybe you want to have an egg, a piece of toast, and a bit of Greek yogurt for breakfast. Have a little bit more protein. How can you start with where you're at and do what's an improvement for you? All right, that is it for today. Have a wonderful week. Thanks for being here. And if you are loving the podcast, 3 ways you can help. Number 1, subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you're listening to the podcast. Number 2, you can share it with a friend by either hitting the share button. You can take a screenshot and you can share it to your socials. And number 3, if you could leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast, that does help the podcast be found. And until next week, have a wonderful week. Enjoy your protein. Let me know what you think about this episode. And if you have any questions, please DM me on Instagram or you could email me, Tanya, Tanja, at tanyashaw.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. Talk to you next week.